a wonderful member of Congress, is unpack a particular aspect of this immigration crisis. But as we always do, we're going to talk about solutions as well. So you're in for a real treat. This member of Congress is recently arrived to the U.S. House. She's already a superstar because she's willing to tell the truth and do so with a smile on her face, always looking for a solution. So it is a great privilege and honor to welcome to this week's show Congresswoman Yvette Herrell of New Mexico's 2nd District. Congresswoman, thanks for making time for this.
I am so happy to be here and thrilled to be able to talk about these issues that, like you just mentioned, people need to understand them and they need to hear the facts behind all of these issues.
Well, that is true. As we always do, we'll take a little bit of time, just you and me, unpacking this problem, going through some solutions. We always make time for audience questions. So if you're in the audience, you can go into the comment section of wherever you're watching this broadcast and ask a question. We'll get to as many as we can in the time that we have. I will say, Representative Herrell, having lived in New Mexico and in your district, which is basically the southern 2/3 of that gigantic state of New Mexico, it's beautiful to see the New Mexico flag, one of the great flags in the United States. I have to be careful saying that, being a Texan, but that is a beautiful state and a beautiful district. Before we get into the real issue at hand, which is the border crisis, I know that our audience members, most of whom are tuning in from outside Texas, a lot of them from New Mexico, are curious about what's going on in DC right now. You know, what's the bird's eye view of the state of play there?
Yeah, sadly, the American people, their voice is not being heard, especially by the leadership, by Nancy Pelosi. And in fact, it's just to me, it's a dereliction of duty. Here we are with the border wide open. We have, an economy that needs to get going again. We have energy that now we're seeing this administration push overseas, losing our energy dependence. And we're looking at our speaker who's actually putting out a memo earlier this week, putting the mask mandate back in order. Then comes out with a memo a couple of days ago saying, all right, we'll have the Capitol Police arrest your visitors or your staff members for not complying. Here's the irony of this. It's only effective in the House. You can walk right next door to the Senate. They don't even have a mask mandate. So to me, this is really what over-governing looks like. This is really why Nancy Pelosi should be the poster child for term limits. This is why we need them, because we have people who are out of touch with reality, out of touch with our districts, out of touch, seriously, with Americans making decisions. And this is why it's important that we have these conversations so the American people can really understand what is truly happening in Washington, D.C.
Well, I'm so grateful. I'm sure our audience members are, Congresswoman, for your willingness to speak, what we might say, truth to power, right? Speaker Pelosi, all due respect that every human deserves and her office deserves, is just, I think, abusing her authority. And ironically, tragically, ridiculously, that issue of the mask mandate in the U.S. House is a perfect segue to the topic that we're going to cover, right? Which is that we not only have this border crisis, but we've got different rules for members of Congress of the U.S. House than we do for illegal immigrants to this country. So sort of the proverbial 30,000 foot question, what sense do you make of that? And what's the situation at the border when it comes to these policies of the Biden-Harris administration?
Yeah, I have a really short answer, and then I'll give you a long one. 2 words: double standard. Because we're holding the American people to a different standard than we are people who are, remind you, breaking the law to get here illegally. So here we have a 900% uptick in COVID-related cases on the border because of the open border. But yet we're going to start mandating everybody wear the mask, even those who have been vaccinated in our country. But yet turn the blind eye to those coming here illegally who are bringing COVID, exposed to COVID and other infectious diseases. So it's time that the American people understand this is costly. It's cruel to those that are coming here, making the trek, thinking they're coming for greater responsibility and greater possibilities for their lives. But it's costly. It's costing the American people billions of dollars. But we can't see a double standard that works. I mean, it's not, if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. If we're going to have to mask up, close down, put the mask back on the kids going to school, then we ought to be shutting down that border and understanding who and what is coming across that southern border. Because, you mentioned this earlier in your opening, the border town is every town USA as it relates to illegals as it relates to drugs and as it relates to uptick in crime.
Well, that's so true. And as I mentioned, and I know this has been a hallmark of your career already in Congress, we'll talk about solutions here momentarily. We'll get to a great legislative solution you and some colleagues have. But just before we get to that, I'm going to ask you, for our audience members who are, I'm sure, generally well informed about the border crisis, as a member of Congress, do you gravitate to certain statistics or certain facts, basically the reality on the ground right now at the border, that you think can persuade people who are not persuaded that there is truly a crisis, that this is not hyperbole by you, by me, by people who think that it is?
Yeah, I think we have had to kind of work through that, because I believe we have to do as Americans is kind of move away and separate, fact from fiction. And unfortunately, over the course of years and just time and time again, rhetoric. I think Americans get tired of hearing rhetoric, both sides of the aisle. This time, I think we need to see the dust is settling and really look at the bigger picture and what this is doing we're diluting our country. But the double standard again, putting our law enforcement, our border patrol, our communities in harm's way over this coronavirus, and yet, or the COVID, and then, opening up the border. And I believe in the American people better than I believe in this government. And I think they'll start seeing this. I mean, we are talking with law enforcement all over the country, all over the district. They see an uptick. The fentanyl, I mean, it's over 4,000% increase in the amount of fentanyl that's come across the southern border. Not another drugs, guns, everything. So as we start seeing how these issues are going to impact our communities, our schools, our families, our children, I think now we have maybe gotten closer to getting the attention of the American voter, the American taxpayer, who understands, okay, maybe there is something about this, but just look at the sheer numbers of people that are coming here. And that's why the legislation that we'll talk about is so very important to protect the health and safety of the American people first and foremost.
Well, that's just it. I mean, this is a public health and a public safety issue. And of course, I think sometimes those of us, I'd call myself a conservative, we use this phrase rule of law, which is very important, but we don't explain what that means. And I think what you're saying very articulately, and what the proposed legislation would do, is really fix that problem, that we really would honor the rule of law and the human persons. We would love to come here legally in a transparent system, right? Important to your state, important to Texas, important everywhere. So that's a probably pretty good way of introducing a question about your legislation. You've got several colleagues in the House who are supporting it. We've got some great folks in the Senate, including our very own Senator Cruz, who is. Why don't you lay out what the legislation would do if, in fact, you're able to get it passed?
Yeah, it's a great piece of legislation because, number one, it puts the health and safety and welfare of the American people first. So we're talking about the SHIELD Act. So I introduced it on the House side. Senator Cruz introduced it on the Senate side. And basically what this bill will do is it keeps Title 42 in play for a year after the passage of this bill. And remember, this is one of the health policies that President Trump put into place to help essentially protect our border and protect the health of the American citizen going through the pandemic. We had the Remain in Mexico, and then we had the Title 42, both excellent tools for our Border Patrol agents. So this bill would simply say, listen, we know how important this Title 42 is on the border, and we know how important it is to protect American people. And now that we're seeing this Delta variant strain, we're seeing now an uptick in cases. It is just common sense to put the health and safety of the American people first and foremost. And simply that's what Senator Cruz and I are trying to do.
Well, it's essential. So we could speak probably for a couple hours about the legislation, but we want to give our audience members, I know you do, very important to you, sort of some tools to be able to talk about this issue, to take some action. And we're going to get to their questions here momentarily, but I've got one more question for you before we do. And that is, there's so much lingo in this policy area of immigration and the border crisis. And you've unpacked a few of those things really well. One of them is Title 42. We hear that more in the news. But there's another phrase, discharge petition, that I'm sure our viewers see in a lot of reports, a lot of articles, they see in some newscasts. Would you explain that for us and why that's important to understand?
Yeah, you know what? Thank you for bringing that up, because we also have another similar bill called the Pause Act. It's almost an identical bill to the Shield Act, but a discharge petition is simply this. We're saying we believe that this policy is so important that we're going to put it down on the speaker's table and get as many members of that House chamber to sign onto a discharge petition, so that once it reaches a certain number, we can go right to the floor for a vote. Right now, we have over 140 signatures on this the discharge petition. And that's just kind of the urgency of how important this Title 42 and this bill is, both the Shield Act and the Pause Act. This would be incredibly important for the American people. And so we're pushing on that. And I would ask you to encourage your members of Congress, if they haven't signed the discharge petition, to do that, because once we hit that quota of signatures, we can then force a vote on it on the House floor. And that's a bill that I think is worthy of a recorded vote.
Amen. So homework assignment number one for all of us, me, for anyone in the audience, is to call your member of Congress and ask them if they signed the discharge petition for that legislation. So we'll get to some other next steps before we wrap up, because we always want to, and I know you do this as well, Congresswoman, be able to, what I call, read reality truthfully. The reality about the border crisis is really ugly. In fact, it's tragic. It's literally tragic. And yet there are some actions that each of us can take that move us to a solution. And as we get into some audience questions, I think you'll see the spirit of that in those. So speaking of audience questions, we have a handful of really good questions. I'll pitch these to you, Representative Herrell. The first one's, I think, a really fair question. Maybe a few months ago, people would have thought this was a conservative conspiracy theory. But this audience member asks, is it safe to say there's a correlation between the rise in COVID cases in border counties and the open border?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, in fact, the numbers don't lie. And for an administration that's so excited about science, this is one piece of science they ought to be watching. We have seen an uptick of about 900% increase in the COVID cases. And remember, we have over 130 different countries, people from almost 130 different countries coming to our southern border. So it's not just Mexico, it's not just Honduras, 130 countries. It could be one or two people, but believe me, it's not just COVID or variants of COVID. It's also other infectious diseases that we have not seen in our country in decades. So absolutely, there is an absolute correlation. And what's interesting is we've got the travel mandates in place. So you can't travel, out of country, in country. There are travel mandates all over the world, except in the southern border, where we've rolled out the red carpet, because anybody who can get to the southern border deserves, apparently, according to this administration, to roll right in, regardless of status and regardless of whether or not they have the virus.
Yeah, it's remarkable that I'm just pausing. This is not a political statement or a partisan statement, just from a policy point of view. I'd like to think there'd be some intellectually honest left of center folks who'd say the same thing. The point is, if you look at what the Biden-Harris administration has done with their willing accomplices, the leaders of the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate, it really is a tragedy. If you're someone, regardless of your philosophical disposition, who believes that immigrants are important to this country, what the Biden-Harris administration is doing is not helping the situation one bit, including at the very basic human level, considering the risks that these migrants have to take just to get to the border.
Well, that's it's dangerous for them as well. People say, "Oh, Yvette, you just don't, you're racist, this, that." No, I'm not. The uptick in mortality rate for those traveling through, not only when they leave their country of origin, but through their transit countries, the death rate right now is over 300 people who've lost their lives just coming here. And oh, by the way, no one's talking about the 1 in 3 women and children who are raped and pillaged on the way to America. So like I said, this is a dangerous situation for those making the trek, but then we put every American citizen in harm's way. And so it's not rhetoric, it's actual truth. And I believe that common sense should be, what prevails in this situation right now.
Yeah, it's true. There's a shortage of that, I think, in DC generally, right?
For sure.
Which is why states, especially in the Sun Belt, are so important, because they're common sense members like you. I've got a couple of questions that seem specific to Texas, but in fact, they're of national importance. They seem specific to Texas because they're about our Governor Greg Abbott, who's done an excellent job, I would argue, on immigration policy, having to step up, unfortunately. I say that because controlling the border is the federal government's obligation. It's not the right they have, it's their obligation. So thank goodness Governor Abbott has been courageous about this. The first question is so relevant. This has been in the news over the last few days. Governor Abbott, very much motivated by his understanding of Title 42, has taken his state authority and is saying, look, we've got an outbreak of COVID cases. There are county officials all over Texas who are worried about this. We have got to transport people who are sick or we think are sick back across the border. The Attorney General of the United States, Merrick Garland, said he's going to sue the state of Texas for doing that. What sense can you make of this for people watching this?
You know, it's like this administration's gone AWOL on their responsibility to the American people. And I am so thankful for Governor Abbott. In fact, even Governor DeSantis in Florida, who understands the importance of securing our border, and the other states that are sending actual resources down to Texas and over to Arizona, Governor Ducey, they're understanding how important it is to protect the American people. And I am so grateful for them because that is one of our responsibilities, the health and welfare of our nation. And some have taken their oath of office very seriously, while others don't seem to understand what that responsibility looks like. And I've written letters to our governor, not once, not twice, but now 3 times, asking her to please put National Guard on the southern border in New Mexico. Look and see what our neighbors are doing to the east and the west, so that we don't create this big void when it comes to another surge. We won't see people just rushing through in New Mexico. But the governor of Texas, and also your Texas delegation, is amazing, and I'm glad they sort of adopted me, but you've got Congressman Jody Arrington and others, Brian Babbitt, who have really taken the responsibility of protecting Americans seriously, and in fact have introduced some great legislation as well. But this is what we're supposed to be doing, putting Americans first. That's our job, and this administration is failing on us miserably.
It's really that simple, and it shouldn't be a Democrat or a Republican problem. And I would say, unfortunately, it's true that your governor of New Mexico is making it a Democrat or Republican problem, right? This is, as you said, it's an American issue. Even beyond that, it's a human issue, and that's why I'm just proud that the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott's doing such a good job, along with Governor Ducey of Arizona, and so many governors from non-border states who are sending National Guard troops to help out. So kind of a related question is posed by a member of the audience, and that is about Governor Abbott's announcement many weeks ago, which our organization was part of, and I would like to think we played an important part, of finishing the border wall system of President Trump. What do you think of that? And sort of relatedly, as you travel around New Mexico and DC and other states, what do other people outside Texas think about that idea?
Listen, the border wall works. That barrier works. And what some people may not know is with the border wall, that barrier came fiber optics, came some highly technical advances as it relates to monitoring, those coming close to the border, being able to, the sensors and so forth, great tools for the Border Patrol. I ran on the platform of finishing the wall, standing with President Trump to ensure that we're securing American borders. And people know that walls work. If they didn't, then we wouldn't have fences around the house. We wouldn't have locks on our doors. But here's the double standard. On January 20th at midnight, we stopped all border construction on the wall. Yet on January 21st, we built a 10-foot fence around the Capitol complex. We can't have it both ways. And I would just submit to this. American people should be more worried about the policies coming out of Washington, D.C. from behind that fence than what was trying to get in. But the truth is, we just know we've got this investment, and to stop that, one, we lost jobs. Number two, we have billions of dollars in investment, and people want that wall there. And we know that the barriers work. So for them to have stopped it midway, but it points to look at the XL Keystone Pipeline too. I mean, all these great things, sadly from where I'm sitting, this dismantling of our country, just opening up a vulnerable side to America that I think we haven't seen in the likes of years. It's a very hard thing to watch. because we know how great this nation is and we know how great the opportunities are here, but not under the guise of climate change and, working for the people. This isn't how it works. And Americans, I think, are frustrated. They want the wall. They want some sense of stability for our country.
Well, that's exactly right. And I'm going to paraphrase a really good question from another audience member, which is, do you think that given that frustration, the level of awareness about the crisis, that we've gotten to a tipping point where we're going to be able to hopefully see some progress made on the crisis at the border?
You know what? We absolutely have to, because you said it earlier, and I wholeheartedly agree. This is now far, far beyond a Democrat-Republican issue. This is not a party issue. This is actually a people issue on all fronts. Those coming here illegally, those living here legally, it's that double standard. We have got to just get to the place where we can have a dialogue that makes sense. I mean, we honestly invited Vice President Harris to New Mexico so she could understand the reality that we live in, because, I in fact just had a meeting with some of the Border Patrol guys here, and here's the problem. What happens in the Rio Grande Valley and what is happening over, say, by Lordsburg or Deming, New Mexico, it's very different. These are very different groups of people. The folks coming into New Mexico are bringing a lot of drugs, and they don't want to get caught. They don't want to be seen. Whereas where you have really the epicenter of crossings is over in the Rio Grande Valley, because people are just coming across in droves and throwing their hands up. But at the end of the day, this isn't a political issue. It's a people issue. And I believe the value of Americans should be first and foremost, and we should start having a sincere conversation. And the sad thing is, this could have been handled by keeping the protocols in place that were working under the Trump administration. It's just that simple. And I think that's what's frustrating to myself, my colleagues, and lots of Americans.
I tell you, I'm glad you said that. I want to underscore that, having been to the border several times, because we're real active in trying to promote good policy like what you're articulating. The most frustrating thing is that all President Biden had to do is change nothing about existing policy, and we would not have this border crisis. This is a self-inflicted problem with political aims.
100%. And that it just kind of goes back to the old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It was working. And especially what is so frustrating, especially under the pandemic, when, listen, New Mexico suffered greatly, as the whole nation did. But, we lost over 2,000 businesses that closed permanently. They're not coming back. We have kids that are falling way behind in education because of the closure of the schools. And yet somehow the idea that this is not a crisis, everyone in the world knows it except this administration. And honestly, I think they know it too. They just don't want to admit it, because I've never seen a group so concerned about trying to undo good policies that work for the American public that President Trump did, that they would be willing to compromise the future of our greatest asset, which is our children. And this is what is so frustrating. But I agree. I think Americans see it. I think they understand it. In that Title 42, and I just want to go into it a little bit deeper right now, in case, because you're getting questions. Title 42 is the health order that gave the Border Patrol agents the ability to expel anybody coming here illegally from Mexico or Canada. The Border Patrol could then do a quick process on the border and expel them. Because the reason they put it into place is because of the COVID-19. Now, fast forward, where we are now going back to what looks like more mandates. Why on earth would we do away with the one health policy, the protective order, that really did put the health and safety of the American people at the forefront? And this, to me, is very dangerous, because if you're going to open the border, you're signaling that, and do away with Title 42, which is what the administration wants to do, then you're signaling all is well. We're healthy, we're good to go. It's not that way. Now we're seeing more mask mandates for schools, federal employees. And this is what is the frustrating part. And that's what the American people need to see, the double standard on things. And I believe as we continue the dialogue and people get more engaged, I think they start understanding it. Wait a minute, I can't open my business, or I can't send my child to school without a mask, but we're going to let, over 100,000 people a month into the southern border with no questions asked, no COVID tests. and they're coming right into the interior.
Oh, they are very quickly, sometimes within hours of having crossed the border, which is just ridiculous. We've got time for one more audience question, and then I've always asked a question at the end of our guests. And the audience question is kind of back to the homework assignments. By the way, audience member thanks you for kind of outlining the problem so well. They ask, what else can they do? They're going to call their member of Congress on the discharge petition. What other assignments will you give them that helps your cause, which is the American cause?
I would say, first off, let's be praying about these issues that are facing our country right now. But I would say, don't let up. Listen, no longer can we afford to sit on the sideline. We just can't. There's so many policies right now. We sit down and we think, we'll just roll with the punches. No more. We're getting gut punched every day. And these are unnecessary policies that are happening to the American population and the America we love. We have got to be pushing on this administration. I would recommend you push on my governor to get in the game here and help protect the American people. Because like we talked about earlier, just because you don't live in New Mexico or Texas or Arizona or California, this is a problem for every community in every part of this country. It's not just, this one little area of the state and the country anymore. It's everybody's problem. It's America's problem. It's not a political issue. It's a people issue. But I can't tell you how much it would go a long way for this administration to hear from the people of America in, day out, and put the pressure on them, because our voices have been stifled. There's a lot of this, we're not hearing a lot of these things that we're talking about on the news. So we need to be talking about these things and pushing on them to make good decisions for the future of our nation. Our country depends on this right now.
Oh, it's true. I mean, it really is, it has the potential to be an existential problem. And I don't say that lightly. So
listen, I don't want to interrupt, but let me put it look at it through a different lens for just a moment. Look what's happening in Cuba. I admire the Cubans that are standing firm, fighting for liberty and freedom. I mean, they are in a place right now where they know their country is at a crossroads. I am fearful that if we don't get a handle on this extraordinary issue, this crisis on our southern border, that we will dilute the American way so much so that we were, as Mark Levin would say, this is American Marxism. I'm fearful we will look like Cuba in some years down the road. And who's going to come to the rescue of the American people? And that's why this is so urgent and so important.
Oh, it's crucial. That Cuban example, I think, is really telling. And I don't think you're off base at all by making that prediction about America if we continue to have policies like this. That's believe it or not, it's a perfect transition to the last question I always ask guests, especially when they're elected officials like you are. And that is, we've covered a really hard issue. We've told the truth about it. It's kind of hard to accept that this is going on in the United States. In spite of all of that, Congresswoman Yvette Herrell of New Mexico, why did you wake up this morning optimistic about the future of America?
Because you know what? I believe in the American exceptionalism. I believe in every person I represent here, whether from New Mexico or the nation. This is really, for me, I'm internally grateful to do this job and be that voice for everybody. And I just pray about it every day. I know I can't make everybody happy, but I know at the end of the day, I can look in the mirror and say, I did what I needed to do for the people of America. But it's because I believe in the American people so dearly. And it is my greatest honor to serve in this capacity.
Well, you're doing a phenomenal job from your friends here in Texas and around the country. Representative Yvette Herrell, you are a superstar. You tell the truth. You're optimistic. You're a great American. Thank you for what you're doing. And thanks for making time for this. I'd say the same thing for those of you in the audience. You make this possible. May the Lord continue to prosper the work of your hands as we go out and try to save the country, because we all know it's worth it. Take care.
Thank you so much.